They laughed when I married below my level. I stayed silent because silence was the only move that worked. The hall smelled like lilies and polished wood, the kind of neutral luxury, chosen so no one could object to it later. I arrived after the speeches had started. That was intentional. When you come late, people don't ask you to help, they just point. My name card wasn't on the main table. I noticed that first, before I noticed my sister's smile. I stood there for a moment, holding my jacket over my arm, scanning the place settings. Parents at the center. My sister beside them, already radiant, already rehearsed. Cousins, uncles, family friends, arranged like an audience. Then, near the back, a small round table, with 2 empty chairs, and no cards. A waiter caught my eye, and nodded toward it. Apologetic, as if the oversight belonged to the room, and not to a decision. I sat anyway. From where I was, I could see my parents clearly. My mother didn't look at me. My father glanced once, then adjusted his napkin. The microphone hummed. My sister tapped it lightly, a gesture she'd practiced. She didn't thank everyone yet. She thanked our parents first, for their standards, for teaching us what kind of family we are. There was a pause, a ripple of approving laughter. She enjoyed those pauses. She always had. Then she found me. Some of us, she said, smiling in my direction, didn't quite keep up. She let that sit. David married. Well, another pause. Married for love. Laughter again. Louder this time. Polite. Controlled. The kind people give when they're told it's safe to laugh. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I had learned that about myself a long time ago. She's sweet, my sister continued. Very grounded. She tilted her head, as if searching for the right word. Not exactly from our world, but I guess that's part of the charm. Someone clinked a glass. Someone else leaned forward, interested. The room had decided I was the subject now. My mother smiled thinly. She didn't speak, but she didn't interrupt either. My father cleared his throat and said nothing. I thought of my wife then, not present, because she was working in night shift at the clinic. She'd insisted I come alone. You don't need backup, she'd said, as if this were a meeting and not a family. My sister lifted her glass. To compromise, she said. The word landed carefully, like a blade placed flat on a table. I raised my own glass slightly, not in response, just to give my hands something to do. The wine tasted like nothing. I hadn't expected it to. There were other details. Small ones. The server who refilled everyone else's water first. The way my cousin leaned over to whisper something, and then glanced back at me, curious. The chair beside mine remained empty. It had my wife's name on it, written in a careful hand that didn't match the others. Someone had remembered to include her. Someone else had decided she wouldn't need it. When the speeches ended, music began. People stood. I stayed seated long enough to watch my parents rise together. Coordinated. Practiced. They passed my table without looking down. My sister brushed past me. Her perfume was sharp, expensive. She leaned close enough for only me to hear. You could have done better, she said softly, kindly. We all know it. I nodded once. It was easier than explaining that better is a moving target, and she had always been chasing something that never turned around. Outside, the air was colder. The night had that clean stillness that only comes after a room full of voices. I stood near the entrance, listening to the muffled music through the doors, and checked my phone. 3 messages from my mother, all sent within minutes of each other. Don't be sensitive. She didn't mean it like that. Come back inside. People are asking. I put the phone back in my pocket without replying. Across the parking lot, the building's windows glowed. Inside, they were celebrating continuity. Appearances intact. Standards maintained. I walked to my car instead. As I opened the door, I noticed something I hadn't earlier. The event program folded into my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, smoothing the crease. My sister's name was printed prominently, embossed. Beneath it, a list of acknowledgements. My name wasn't there. Not as a sibling. Not as family. Just absent. I folded the program carefully and placed it on the passenger seat. Driving home, I took the long way. Past the office building I'd helped purchase years ago, when my father's credit wasn't enough. Past the warehouse I'd signed for, so my sister's business could expand without scrutiny. Past the clinic where my wife worked, the lights still on, patients still waiting. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my sister. You embarrassed yourself by leaving. I read it twice, then turned the phone face down. At home, the apartment was quiet. Shoes by the door. A mug in the sink from the morning. Normal things. Real things. I hung my jacket, placed the folded program in a drawer I rarely opened, and sat at the table. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. What I felt was clarity. They hadn't laughed because of who I married. They laughed because they believed I was smaller now, reduced, easier to dismiss. I finished the glass of water I'd poured and stood up. Outside, a siren passed somewhere far away, then faded. I checked the drawer once more before closing it. Inside, beneath the program, were copies of documents I hadn't looked at in months. I hadn't needed to. Until now. The morning after the reception, my phone began to vibrate before the alarm. I let it. When it stopped, I waited another minute, then reached over and turned it face down. Silence returned, thin but workable. By the time I made coffee, there were 11 missed calls. My mother left the first voicemail. Her voice was controlled, measured the way it always was, when she wanted to sound reasonable. "You shouldn't have left like that," she said. It made things awkward. The second message was shorter. "Call me." My sister's messages came next, spaced out, strategic. "You overreacted. Everyone was joking. Don't turn this into a thing." My father didn't leave a voicemail. He sent a single text. "We need to talk." I drank my coffee standing at the counter, watching steam lift and disappear. When you stand, you're less likely to settle into the weight of things. I'd learned that too. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to work. The office was quiet in the early hours, just the way I liked it. I reviewed reports, signed off on renewals, answered emails that required actual decisions. The kind of work that leaves a paper trail. By mid-morning, the phone rang again. This time, it was my mother calling my office line. I let it go to voicemail. By noon, the tone shifted. "You're being dramatic," she said in one message. "After everything we've done for you." That phrase again. Everything. In the afternoon, my sister tried a different angle. Her voice was almost gentle. "You know how people talk," she said. "I was protecting you. If I hadn't said something, they would have said worse." I imagined her practicing that line in the mirror, softening the edges, until it sounded like concern. I still didn't respond. The pressure wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It came in the form of reminders. Subtle accusations. A cousin texting to say my parents were worried. An aunt asking if my wife was adjusting. Each message carried the same implication. I had disrupted something fragile, and it was my responsibility to fix it. That evening, my wife came home late, shoulders slumped, hair pulled back tighter than usual. She didn't ask how the event went. She never did. Instead, she set her bag down and leaned against the counter across from me. "They called the clinic," she said. "I waited your sister," she added. "Asked if I could take extra shifts. Said the family might need support." I nodded once. She didn't ask how I was. My wife said, not angry, just precise. I reached for her hand. She squeezed back, brief and solid. After dinner, I opened the drawer. The documents were arranged the way I'd left them months ago, not hidden, just unmentioned. Loan agreements, ownership shares, guarantees signed, when optimism was cheaper than caution. I hadn't thought of them as leverage then. They were solutions. Temporary bridges. Family helps family. That was the language used at the time. I'd believed it. The warehouse was the first thing I reviewed. My sister's expansion project. She'd been praised for her ambition. The truth was less polished. Her credit hadn't been sufficient. The bank required a guarantor. My father had asked me, casually, over dinner. "It's just a formality," he'd said. "Your name carries weight." So I signed. The office building came next. Purchased during a downturn. My father's business needed space, credibility. I provided both, quietly, through an LLC structured in my name for tax efficiency. His words. Then there were the accounts. Smaller things, lines of credit, deferred payments. Decisions made during crises when everyone promised transparency later. Later never came. I didn't feel betrayed revisiting them. I felt detached, as if I were reviewing someone else's history. That's what time does when you don't feed it emotion. The next morning, my father showed up at my office unannounced. He stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the room as if it were evidence. "You're avoiding us," he said. "I've been busy," I replied. He took a seat without being invited. He looked older than he had the week before. Not frail, just less certain. "Your sister is under a lot of stress," he said. That comment at the reception, she meant it lightly. I finished for him. He nodded, relieved. "Exactly." We sat in silence for a moment. I let it stretch. "Your mother thinks you're upset about the seating," he added. "If that's the case, it was an oversight." I opened a folder on my desk and slid it toward him. "Not the important one." Just a renewal notice. Do you recognize this? I asked. He glanced at it, then frowned. Why are you showing me this now? Because it expires next quarter, I said. And it requires my signature. He leaned back, studying me more carefully now. We can talk about that later, he said. Right now, we need to focus on family unity. There it was. Unity, when convenient. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply closed the folder and placed it back where it belonged. Later works, I said. He left soon after, his steps slower than when he'd arrived. That afternoon, an email came in from the bank. Polite, professional, a reminder of upcoming reviews. I forwarded it to my personal account and archived it. By evening, my sister called again. This time, she didn't bother with warmth. If you pull anything, she said, you'll ruin us. I noted the phrasing. Us, not me. I haven't done anything, I replied. Yet, she said. After the call, I sat in the dark living room and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. The city outside moved on, indifferent. That steadied me. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies. I wanted accuracy. For things to be named correctly. 2 days later, my father requested a meeting. Neutral ground, a conference room downtown. He said the lawyer would be there just to clarify some things. I agreed, not because I felt cornered, because clarity was overdue. That night, before bed, I placed the documents back in the drawer, adding one more folder on top. Updated, indexed, ready. I turned off the light and lay still, breathing evenly. For the first time since the reception, the messages stopped. In the quiet, I understood what had shifted. They no longer assumed I was smaller. They were beginning to wonder what I knew. The conference room overlooked the river. Glass walls, neutral art, nothing personal. Places like that are designed to make everyone behave. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a seat near the window. From there, I could watch the water move without reacting to it. My sister arrived first. She looked composed, the way she always did when she expected to win. Her bag was structured, her posture intentional. She didn't sit beside me. She chose the chair directly across, creating a line she thought she could control. My parents followed. My mother nodded at me without smiling. My father avoided my eyes entirely. Last to arrive was the lawyer. Middle-aged, precise, carrying a folder thicker than necessary. He introduced himself, shook hands, and took the remaining seat at the head of the table. Thank you all for coming, he said. Let's begin. No one spoke immediately. That silence was useful. It forced attention. The lawyer opened his folder and adjusted his glasses. This meeting was requested to clarify several financial and legal relationships within the family. My sister crossed her legs. This feels excessive, she said. We're family. He nodded once. That's often when clarification matters most. He turned to me. Mr. Langar, you're listed as primary guarantor on multiple assets connected to your family's businesses. Some of these agreements are approaching review periods. My father stiffened. My mother's hands folded tighter in her lap. I wasn't aware we needed to revisit those, my sister said quickly. They've always been handled. Handled doesn't mean owned, the lawyer replied calmly. He slid a document across the table toward her. She glanced at it, then looked up. That can't be right, she said. The warehouse is mine. You operate it, he said. Ownership is a different matter. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The lawyer continued, methodical. He outlined structures, percentages, guarantees. The language was neutral, but the meaning accumulated weight. Each sentence narrowed the space my family had assumed was theirs. My mother spoke next. David wouldn't do anything to harm us. No one looked at me when she said it. I haven't, I replied. The lawyer paused, then nodded slightly, as if acknowledging accuracy. Mr. Langar has been compliant, he said. Consistently, there have been no disruptions. However, there have also been no updates. My sister leaned forward. So update them, she said. This is unnecessary. That depends, the lawyer replied, on consent. He turned to me again. Several renewals require your explicit approval. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Not abruptly, just enough to mark intention. I've reviewed everything, I said. I won't be renewing under the same terms. My sister laughed once, short and incredulous. You're serious? Yes. My father finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was confused, as if something familiar had failed to respond. What do you want? He asked. I considered the question, not because I didn't know, but because it deserved precision. I want separation, I said. Clear boundaries. Ownership aligned with responsibility. My sister shook her head. You're doing this because of a joke. I didn't answer that. The lawyer spoke instead. Intent isn't relevant here. Authority is. He slid another document forward. This one toward my parents. These properties were secured using Mr. Langar's standing. He said, without his continuation, refinancing will require adjustments. What kind of adjustments? My mother asked. He met her eyes. Operational changes. Asset redistribution. Potential liquidation. The words sat there, unembellished. The river outside kept moving. My sister stood up. This is ridiculous, she said. He wouldn't dare. I stayed seated. The lawyer looked at her, then back to his notes. There's more. He explained timelines, notices already prepared. Options available. Nothing dramatic. Just the slow, undeniable movement of facts aligning. By the time he finished, the room was very quiet. My father spoke again, softer this time. Why didn't you tell us you felt this way? I thought of the reception, the empty chair, the laughter. I did, I said, repeatedly, just not with words. No one argued that. The meeting ended without raised voices. There was no apology. None was required. Everything that needed saying had already been documented. Outside, my sister caught up to me in the hallway. You think this makes you better? She asked. I stopped walking and looked at her. Really looked. No, I said. It makes things accurate. She didn't follow after that. Over the next weeks, changes unfolded quietly. Notices sent. Contracts revised. Operations adjusted. My parents downsized. My sister's business relocated. There were no announcements. No explanations offered to extended family. People noticed anyway. They always do. The calls stopped. One afternoon my mother left a message asking if we could have dinner. Just the four of us. Neutral tone. No urgency. I didn't return it. Instead, I drove to the clinic where my wife worked and waited until her shift ended. She came out tired, eyes softening when she saw me. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, I said, and meant it. We walked home together, unhurried. The city lights reflected off windows, off water, off nothing in particular. Ordinary things. Later that night, I opened the drawer one last time. I removed the event program, unfolded it, and placed it in the recycling bin. Then I closed the drawer and locked it. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. They end with alignment. I slept well that night. The distance didn't arrive all at once. It formed a way frost as thin, gradual, undeniable by morning. Weeks passed without messages. No accidental calls. No forwarded family updates. My phone became what it was meant to be again. A tool, not a tether. I didn't celebrate that. I noticed it. The way you notice a room finally cooling after a long summer. Work settled into a steadier rhythm. With the guarantees removed, decisions became simpler. Fewer emergencies disguised as favors. Fewer late-night requests framed as loyalty. The clarity was efficient, almost kind. One afternoon, I received a letter instead of a call, handwritten. My mother's script careful, rounded, deliberate. She had always believed handwriting made things sincere. She wrote about memories first. Holidays, sacrifices, the years when things were hard for all of us. She avoided specifics. She always had toward the end. She wrote that she hoped I understood how much they had relied on me. How sudden change can be difficult. She didn't ask me to reverse anything. She asked if I would come by for tea. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, not because I was angry. Because I wasn't finished understanding what distance felt like when it was chosen, not imposed. At home, my wife noticed the change before I mentioned it. You're quieter, she said one evening, rinsing dishes. But lighter. I thought about that. I'm not carrying explanations anymore. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. A month later, I ran into my father by chance. A grocery store, mid-afternoon. He was studying labels, glasses perched low, posture slightly stooped. For a moment, I considered turning down another aisle. Then he looked up and saw me. There was no audience. That mattered. David, he said. Dad. We stood there between shelves of identical choices. The hum of refrigeration filled the space where expectations used to live. I didn't think I'd see you, he said. I live nearby. He nodded, absorbing that. Your mother worries. I know. He hesitated, then spoke carefully. Things are different now. Yes, he waited, as if expecting more. I didn't provide it. She's had to adjust, he continued. So has your sister, I assumed. There was no accusation in my tone. Just acknowledgement. He sighed. You didn't have to do it like that. I looked at him, really looked. At the man who taught me restraint by example, even when he didn't realize he was teaching it. There wasn't another way that would have been understood, I said. He considered that. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. I suppose not. That was all. No apology. No defense. Just a small concession to reality. We parted with a brief handshake. It felt formal, but honest. As autumn deepened, my sister's name surfaced occasionally. A mutual contact mentioning a new venture. A cousin hinting that she was starting over. The words were chosen to sound admirable. I didn't correct them. Starting over is only impressive when it's voluntary. One evening an email arrived from her. Short. Direct. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. I don't think we do. I didn't add anything else. There was no response. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell quietly, transforming the city overnight. My wife and I walked through it the next morning, footprints crisp behind us. She reached for my hand, unprompted. I let the silence do its work. At the clinic, she was offered a supervisory role, earned, overdue. She hesitated, before accepting, worried about time, about balance. I told her what I believed. Take it, I said. We'll adjust. Adjustment had stopped being a threat. On my birthday, a small package arrived. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a book I'd loved as a teenager, an old edition. My sister must have remembered. There was no note. I placed it on the shelf without opening it. That night, I thought about memory, how it can be a bridge or a weapon, depending on how it's used. I chose not to use it at all. The following spring, I sold the office building. The decision wasn't symbolic. It was practical. I wanted fewer anchors to places that no longer represented who I was. The proceeds went where they made sense, investments aligned with my values. Support for work that didn't require silence as payment. When the sale finalized, I walked through the empty halls one last time. The echo of my steps sounded final, not sad. At home, I cleared the drawer. It held nothing important anymore. Just old receipts, a pen that no longer worked, dust in the corners. I left it open, unguarded. One afternoon, my wife asked if I missed them. I didn't answer immediately. I missed the version of myself who believed proximity meant care, I said eventually. But I don't miss the cost. She leaned her head against my shoulder. That was enough. Months later, I attended another family event. A distant cousin's graduation. Neutral territory. I went alone. I sat where my name was placed and nowhere else. My parents were there. My sister wasn't. There were no speeches about standards. No laughter at anyone's expense. Just polite conversation, and the mild awkwardness of people recalibrating. As I left, my mother touched my arm. You seem well, she said. I am. She held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then let go. Outside, the evening was mild, balanced. I walked to my car without looking back. Some people mistake quiet for weakness. I no longer correct them. I know the difference, now, between absence and peace, between silence and erasure. My life had not grown smaller when I stepped away. It had become precise. And precision, I had learned, is its own kind of freedom. The first time I realized the story no longer belonged to them was an ordinary morning. Sunlight came in through the kitchen window, at an angle that suggested nothing important was about to happen. My wife stood at the counter, reading something on her phone, brow slightly furrowed. I poured coffee and waited. She looked up. Do you ever think about what comes next? It wasn't a heavy question, just curiosity. The kind that appears when life stops bracing itself. I think about what stays, I said. She smiled at that, not because it was poetic, but because it was accurate. For years, my life had been shaped by reaction, adjusting, absorbing, anticipating needs before they were voiced. I had been praised for it once. Reliability, they called it. Strength. What they didn't say was that reliability is easiest to admire when it costs someone else something. Now, there were no sudden demands, no implied emergencies, no silences that needed decoding. The absence of noise had become permanent. At work, I began mentoring younger associates. Quiet ones, mostly. The kind who listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions later. I never told them my story. I didn't need to. I taught them something simpler instead. Read what you sign. Notice who laughs when you're not in the room, and never confuse familiarity with fairness. They understood. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a small professional forum. Topic: ethical stewardship, ownership, responsibility, transparency. The words made me pause. Years ago, I would have declined, worried about how it might be perceived. I accepted standing at the podium. I didn't mention family. I spoke about alignment. How power works best when it's visible. How silence can be consent or refusal depending on timing. I spoke calmly. I didn't dramatize. Afterward, a woman approached me. Older, composed. "You speak like someone who's lost something," she said. "I did," I replied. "But I gained clarity." She nodded. "That's rarer." At home that evening, I told my wife about it. She listened, then said something that stayed with me. "Some people build families," she said. "Others inherit them. You chose what to keep." That choice, I realized, had become my quiet legacy. Months later, my father fell ill. Not suddenly, not tragically, just the slow narrowing that age brings. My mother called this time. Her voice was tired, stripped of strategy. "He asks about you," she said. I didn't respond immediately. "I can visit," I said finally. Briefly, the hospital room was clean and impersonal. Machines hummed softly, doing their work without commentary. My father looked smaller in the bed, but his eyes were clear. "David," he said. There was relief in his voice, not entitlement. That mattered. We spoke about neutral things, the weather, a book he was reading but not finishing quickly. When the silence arrived, he didn't rush to fill it. "I didn't protect you," he said eventually. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. "I didn't need protection," I replied. "I needed recognition." He nodded once. "I see that now." That was enough. When I left, my mother walked me to the elevator. She hesitated, then spoke. "You've become very distant." "I've become very exact," I said. "There's a difference." She didn't argue. "My sister didn't come." I didn't ask why. Some distances are mutual agreements, never signed. After my father recovered, life resumed its quieter pace. I didn't reinsert myself. I didn't need to prove that separation could coexist with care. I had already learned that proximity without respect is just another kind of absence. On our anniversary, my wife and I took a short trip, a place near water. We walked along the shore in the early mornings, speaking little. I watched the way she moved through the world unburdened, capable, fully herself. I thought about the word level, how casually it had been used, how eagerly people measure worth with it, as if human value were a staircase. I had married below my level, they said. What they had meant was that I married beyond their control. On the final night of the trip, we sat outside as the sky dimmed. The air was cool, balanced. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. I considered it carefully. "I regret the years I spent explaining myself to people who benefited from misunderstanding me," I said. "Nothing else." She took my hand. "Then you're free." The word settled gently. Not as a victory, as a state. Back home, I began writing again. Not professionally, privately. Notes, reflections, observations. I wrote about silence, how it can be oppressive when imposed, and powerful when chosen. About justice not as spectacle, but as alignment. About family not as obligation, but as practice. I didn't plan to share it. Some truths don't need an audience. One evening, I found the book my sister had sent months earlier. I opened it for the first time. Inside, a single line was underlined. Something about becoming yourself despite expectation. I closed it and placed it back on the shelf. I didn't reach out. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't always a reunion. Sometimes it's the decision not to reopen doors that lead nowhere. Years from now, if someone tells the story, it will sound smaller than it felt. A family disagreement. A business correction. A man who stepped back. They won't see the quiet courage it took to stop shrinking. But I will. And that is the moral I live by now. Dignity doesn't demand applause. Justice doesn't need anger. And silence, when chosen with clarity, can be the most honest voice a person has. My name is David Langar. I didn't rise above anyone. I simply stood where I belonged and stayed there.